This is Krista. Welcome back to Made to Be Whole. Stay tuned for part one of a three-part series recapping this year's ILADS Scientific Conference. Made to Be Whole is intended for informational purposes only. It's not intended to replace the advice or care of a licensed healthcare professional. Participating in this podcast does not constitute a provider-patient relationship with Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, or any of the guests featured on Made to Be Whole. Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, and any featured guests aren't responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from use of information obtained in this podcast or associated materials. Please consult a healthcare professional for any health-related concerns that you are experiencing. Welcome back to the podcast. I just got back from the ILADS conference in San Antonio. And as I did last year, I wanted to share some of the things I learned that I thought would be most interesting to you. And I've decided to break it down into 3 episodes that are organized by topic. So the first episode, which is this week, is Healing the Terrain. Next week, we'll talk about diagnostics and pathogenesis, which is how the disease progresses in your body. And then finally, we'll talk about treatments. So healing the terrain, this was a theme, and I really, really appreciated the way the conference progressed. I thought it was the best one I had been to so far. And it was also very affirming to me because it lines completely up with what we're doing at our practice now with our foundations program, that if there is chronic infection, you first need to address toxins, micronutrient deficiencies, etc. And that was the point of the conference. So that's really affirming to go and say, hey, we're right on with what science is saying and with what other experts are doing. Now, I think it's really critical that the focus was on healing the terrain both physically and emotionally, because those two things are both really, really critical to healing. There was talk of regulating the nervous system, identifying and removing toxins, restoring sleep, restoring micronutrients, and having the right mindset for healing. So regulating the nervous system is really, really important. We know that when there is infection or other processes causing inflammation or injury, that your body is in fight or flight. You get in what's called the cell danger response, or CDR. The cell danger response was first described by Robert Naviaux, so if you want to look into that, it's pretty interesting stuff. But when you get stuck in the cell danger response or in this sympathetic state, it's really, really difficult to heal. Everything around you is interpreted as danger. You have what Scott Antoine, who is a DO, called a cellular form of anxiety. And those of you that have experienced this know exactly what I'm talking about. Your body is anxious and there's no reason why. So they'll talk about anxiety, but they describe all of these physical symptoms and there's no trigger. You don't feel that way because something terrible just happened, or you saw the person who used to abuse you, or there's this imminent danger that's external that others can see, but your cells are stuck in alarm mode. And if you are in that persistent activated cell danger response, you're not going to be able to heal really well. And Dr. Antoine also described OCD as a safety-seeking behavior, which I thought was very descriptive and appropriate. Your mind is always saying, what if, what if? And part of the reason that happens is because of infection, inflammation, toxins. Your body knows something is not right. And so sometimes OCD is derived from that. So really, really important to understand, first of all, what's happening. If you're stuck in the cell danger response or this fight or flight modality, your body's not going to be able to heal. So the big fat question then is what to do about it. There are a lot of what we call neuromodulatory interventions. We've talked about some of them before. One of my favorites, and we offer it at the practice, is neurofeedback. I think neurofeedback's fantastic. It has helped teaching your body, your nervous system, how to regulate itself. It's physical therapy for the brain. It rewards good brain behavior. Some of the benefits of neurofeedback are first that it's passive. Literally, all you have to do is sit there. We can personalize the experience to something that you like. So it can be music that you like, a video that you like, all sorts of different things. We make sure it's personalized. And there are parts of the neurofeedback program that we use that actually are designed to help people heal from trauma, to re-experience traumatic events from an observer perspective so that you're not thrown back in it. You're not having to relive it and during that stirring up all of those things before, but to be able to experience them as an observer. And it's really difficult to explain if you haven't experienced it, but it's super, super cool. I really enjoy it. There are other programs out there, some of them that you can do on your own. So, for example, there is Annie Hopper's dynamic neural retraining system. If you're familiar with Dr. Neil Nathan, he refers to it a lot. He really likes it. The website for the dynamic neural retraining system, or DNRS, is retrainingthebrain.com. And you can go purchase the program. It's something that you can work through on your own. If you have trauma, you could also do EMDR, which some therapists do. So there are a lot of different ways to do this. I don't think there's a right way, but I think that being very honest and saying, if my body's in fight or flight, I have to help get it out. Yes, I have said many times and will repeat again that for many people, treating the infection can also massively reduce anxiety, and it did that for me, but you also have to reteach your nervous system how to feel safe. Interestingly, too, I've mentioned before, we do at our office IV Procaine. And so Procaine is what's in Novocaine. We give Procaine via IV in a solution of normal saline and sodium bicarbonate. And it's anti-inflammatory, and I absolutely love it. I can feel the inflammation in my brain decreasing, and I've found it to be really, really helpful. But Procaine can also be used in what's called a stellate ganglion block. Somebody spoke on that. So it's an ultrasound guided injection using the Procaine, and it can basically help to kind of shut off your sympathetic nervous system so things can get reset. Yet people have to be trained to do this. It's not something that I'm trained in at that point. But again, it's just looking at different resources in your area. Is there anyone around you that does stellate ganglion blocks? Because that's another thing that has really excellent evidence. It's actually been around for a while. And if you say, well, if it's been around for a while and it's so great, why haven't I heard of it? I have a lot of theories for that, but in general, you will see interventions that involve old generic medications don't get a lot of press because they're old generic medications that nobody's going to get rich off of. So, follow the payroll. So retraining the nervous system, that's kind of a summary of it. The point being, there's not one perfect intervention. It's finding what suits your budget, what's available to you, and what suits your preferences. Not everything's going to work for everyone, but I really think it's critical. Another thing that was talked about extensively is identifying toxins. And that's why we're including in our foundations program a urine toxin screen that looks at mycotoxins, which is the mold exposure, as well as other environmental toxins. So, a little update. I've mentioned before Gideon, who's been on the podcast, that he and some of my other children have 2 copies of this SNP that decreases their ability to detoxify from benzenes by 96 to 98%. And so I have done the urine testing with Gideon, and he has really, really high levels of benzenes, and I have been ripping my hair out trying to figure out where it's coming from. Obviously, smaller amounts that wouldn't affect anyone else aren't going to affect him, but I still have just been going crazy trying to figure this out. He's not exposed to fumes. He doesn't work at a gas station. He's not around smokers. I've been working really hard on getting microplastics eliminated, changing detergents, doing everything I can, but I just felt like something was missing. Well, one of the speakers who specializes in environmental medicine mentioned something about gas stoves. And I'm like, what? Why didn't I think of that? Obviously, if gas and fumes are a problem, gas stoves are a problem. And a lot of his problems and my son Daniel's problems became exponentially worse when we moved into the house that we're in now. So there are a couple things that are different about the house we're in now versus the house we had before. One of them is a gas stove. And it's interesting because I had searched before trying to look at sources of chronic benzene exposure, causes, trying to figure it out. And all I could find were things that said, it's not known, but it's really dangerous. You'll probably get leukemia and die one day. Good luck. I couldn't find anything. But when I specifically searched for gas stoves and benzene toxicity, I found a Stanford study. It was covered on NPR. And for vulnerable individuals, it's actually a really huge deal. And they're finding that the benzene levels are high throughout the homes, not just in the kitchen. So I'm actually incredibly excited. And I've ordered some test kits to check benzene levels, and then I'm getting rid of the stove. But Claudia Miller, she is an expert in environmental medicine. She spoke, and it was really interesting. She does a couple of things that I think are super fascinating. Her practice does these environmental house checks where they'll go to people's homes and help them identify things that could be triggering environmental chemical responses. And they've had massive success just by doing that and helping people with chronic symptoms. So she, along with someone named Nicholas Ashford, wrote a book called Chemical Exposures, Low Levels and High Stakes, which I'm planning on ordering and reading. But I'm going to read it to you the Chat GPT summary, I guess, of her book, because I think it does as good of a job as I do of going through all of this. So she spoke with Tanya Tempsey, and one of the things they introduced was a concept that they discuss in the book, which is TILT, which is toxin-induced loss of tolerance. So they make the point that low-level chemical exposures over time can have the same impact that one massive exposure can. So the overview of the book, it says that it explains how day-to-day variations in chemical exposure may cause unusual and seemingly unpredictable symptoms, including many that have been termed to be psychosomatic in the past. It describes how everyday low-level chemical exposures may cause fatigue, memory impairment, headaches, mood changes, breathing difficulties, digestive problems, and a host of chronic unexplained illnesses, including chronic fatigue syndrome, Gulf War syndrome, and sick building syndrome. So the authors are the first writers to clearly describe and document the process of adaptation, a concept that provides a rational and scientific basis for the understanding of these symptoms. Fascinating to me. A lot of the work is based on a report that was commissioned by the New Jersey Department of Health that won the World Health Organization's Macedo Award. It's the most comprehensive book ever written on sensitivity to low-level chemical exposure. So things that she said that really got my wheels turning when I was looking at my family's health. Like I said, 2 of my kids got much, much, much sicker when we moved into the house right now. So the gas stove is one thing that was different. Another thing that's different is we have found mycotoxins there. And another thing that's different is we did a remodel. And remodeling can be an instigating event for multiple reasons. The VOCs, volatile organic compounds that are in some of the substances used. We know that building materials can have mold in them if they're stored improperly. A lot of stuff's getting stirred up in the environment. So one of the things that Dr. Dempsey and Dr. Miller both mentioned is you have to address the initiating exposure. So when we're going back to root cause, even though both of these particular kiddos had issues before, because things just ballooned once we moved into this house, we are going to have barriers to healing if we don't say, okay, what happened that caused things to explode and what were those things? Did they have these infections before that? Absolutely. I didn't know it at the time, but based on symptoms and what we know now and testing, the infections were still there, but things exploded with the exposure. It's fascinating. It's overwhelming because you think, oh my gosh, one more thing. I mean, obviously, it's going to be easier to go from gas to electric than vice versa. But if you think about, again, all of this endemic chronic illnesses out there, how many more people have gas stoves than electric because it's great for cooking? I mean, I much prefer cooking on a gas stove, but it's not worth the health of my kid who has a 96 to 98% reduced ability to clear benzenes from his body. So I'm like over the moon that there's something concrete that I can do. Another point that they make is that 90% of our time is spent indoors these days. And when I was going through and doing the math, I thought, oh yeah, that's really true for me. I go outside every day. I go on walks, but you add that time up versus the time I spend in my office or in my house. And what's interesting, mold and toxins are sequestered in the home. Do they exist in the outside environment? Sure. Most of the time, the environment adapts. Now, I will give one particular example where that isn't the case. I have multiple patients who have become severely ill because of exposures to pesticides, particularly people who were on or living near farms where pesticides were sprayed, people who worked for agricultural institutions, including universities, doing research. We've done testing on them. We find higher levels of toxins. And for some of these people, it's an instigating event. I remember one patient who their health became dramatically worse after they were out doing a field check for a job, and the fields were sprayed on an unscheduled day. So he didn't know and was there on a day when he shouldn't be. And life fell apart after that. Now, I think what it did was you had the effect of the toxin itself, plus everything underlying that it probably exposed because his immune system was vulnerable, but it was really, really, really bad. And again, you've got people who are working outside, working in nature, working on farms, doing all these healthy things, but they have a lot of exposures. Another thing, this is just a little bit anecdotal, it wasn't in one of the presentations, but I sat next to someone at dinner who works doing physicals for the Department of Energy. And I don't know all of the history background. I'm just going to tell you what I was told because I think it's instructive with this. So there are things that people who work for the DOE, if you've been in one of their facilities, have been exposed to that make them more vulnerable to a lot of significant chronic illnesses. So there was actually a law passed saying if you have spent even one day in one of the facilities of the Department of Energy, you're entitled to medical care and compensation commensurate on what your symptoms are that you've had. So this individual and his spouse, they work for the DOA. They do all of the intake, physicals, screenings, and then allocate how much will be given to them financially to cover health stuff. But you're entitled to this evaluation with one day because of the significance of what you're exposed to and how it can hurt you physically. So think about that. There's a lot out there. It's not, we don't talk about it, but if you look, there's a lot of really clear evidence that it's affecting things, and follow the money for that. The government's not going to allocate that money if there's not proof that it's affecting or has affected people. Another trigger, which is something else I didn't have in my last house. We have this new nicer house, but we've been exposed to a lot of garbage, is attached garages. She talked about how with attached garages, you have, your gas cans stored in there. And so those fumes, they get in, our garage door from our house, it's into the kitchen. I don't have lots and lots of things stored out there, but it makes sense if you have things that you wouldn't keep in the house, but it's in the room right next to it and there's just a regular door. So they recommend for sensitive individuals, like building a standalone shed or somewhere else where those things can be stored separate from your air supply. Now, it could become overwhelming to think of all of these things, but I would just suggest, first of all, figure out what your vulnerabilities are and what your health status is. You may not be as vulnerable genetically, and you may not be really chronically ill and tired. If you are, start with what's within your control. So I'll give you another example of what's within my control. One of our kiddos is moving out and has this genetic constellation as well. And so when I was looking at homes and apartments for rentals, I was just looking at, is there a gas stove? And if there was, I eliminated it from the list. I'm like, we're just taking that exposure off. If you have gas stored in your garage, if you don't have a standalone shed, you can even get, storage cupboards you could maybe put on the back porch. Just look at things one at a time. I was talking to a patient just this week about how you need to zoom in and zoom out. You can have problems if you're always zoomed in, just looking at one thing and hyper focusing, but you can also have problems if you're always zoomed out and you see the big picture and you see everything that needs done and you can't do it and you're never going to get better and this is terrible and I'm a victim and it's hopeless. There's more than I can do. That's not helpful either. I think most of the time we need to step back. What's the big picture? Then zoom in and pick a few things at a time that you can do. There will always be more to do than you can logistically do at once because of emotional constraints, financial constraints, time constraints, access. There's so many different things, but I 100% guarantee you that there's something you can do. And so you need to focus very hard on changing what is within your control, because it's within your control. If there are things that are not within your control, you need to put those on the back shelf and look around to see if there are things you can do to change your circumstances. Are there things you can do to change? Let's step outside of other things that affect the terrain that aren't necessarily medical. If you don't have a supportive group of friends, maybe you can start looking for another group of friends. It's not something you can change overnight. If you don't have the financial resources to do everything you need to do, I would recommend first saying, what can you do? But then also looking for ways to improve your financial situation. And if someone else in your family might be in a better position to do that. I know I'm sensitive. I know everyone's situation's different, but we just can't be victims. We just can't be victims. I remember I'm helping the youth group in our church do this emotional resilience course. That's fantastic. I might have mentioned it before, but it's an emotional resilience course. And I thought it was fascinating. It talked about how with faith, because this is a faith-based curriculum you're using, the Lord can help you move mountains in your life. And that struck me so profoundly because we always think, oh, if I have faith, mountains can be moved. And that's true. Certainly God has the ability to do that, but he wants to help us overcome. And I think more often than not, it's what I brought up earlier about him helping you to move mountains. And that's going to happen a little bit at a time, but it's possible. It really, really is. Now, toxin exposure can also alter the DNA of mast cells. A lot of people talk these days about mast cells, MCAS, and they always want to know, what do I do for my MCAS? What do I do for my NCAS? And certainly we have interventions for that, but let's work on eliminating the trigger, because infection can cause mast cell activation, but so can toxin exposure. Actually alters the DNA of mast cells and makes them more active, can cause a lot of issues. Mold, I mean, we could spend hours and hours talking about mold, but mold is an issue. Neil Nathan was there. Those of you who have been in this world long know that he's the guru. I will tell you some of the things he said about mold particularly, but I want to focus first on what I overheard him say in a lunch conversation. I was sitting at the lunch table where he was, and he gets a lot of flack for what he does. A lot of us who do things outside the box do, but he said he was at a conference a few years ago and he said something and someone yelled out in the audience, "That's not what you said 2 years ago." And he just said, yeah. So you have to be aware, and I know this is difficult for people who want certainty, but anytime someone says the science is settled, that's not really good science, because good science is always looking for new answers, always trying to refine our approaches, always trying to find better ways of doing things. So I very, very frequently will have people come and say, well, I read so-and-so says you have to do X, or you have to do X, or you have to do this test. And they get stuck on these few things. And first of all, remember that healing is individualized. So what works and is critical for one person isn't for the next. But also know that science is a work in progress. And anyone who tells you the science is settled, I think I would take a few steps back and say, yeah, there are some things that are settled, but we're always looking for new answers. A few of the things that Dr. Nathan talked about, everybody has a difference of opinion, I will say, on how to treat, how to test. Even the leaders, like he and Dr. Shoemaker, don't agree on everything, and they're both respected leaders in this field of mycotoxin illness. So again, it doesn't mean who's right, who's wrong. It means evaluate the evidence to see what you can do. There are direct and indirect effects of mold on the blood-brain barrier. So when the blood-brain barrier is compromised, obviously not just mold, but other toxins and infections are more likely to cause neurological symptoms. He feels that people will respond much better to treatment, and we're talking about treatment for vector-borne infections or other things, if you treat mold first, especially if they're a very, very sensitive patient. And I did hear Dr. Horowitz, when he spoke last year, address the same thing. He doesn't always think you need to treat mold first, but if somebody's super sensitive to everything, that you have to start there. Going back to helping your nervous system regulate itself, mold and Lyme, or Dr. Nathan, are major instigators of limbic dysregulation and MCAS. So again, if we want to calm down the nervous system, if we want to reduce inflammation, if we want to treat MCAS, we can't just say, take this, it helps your MCAS symptoms. Take this, it helps your MCAS symptoms. We are going to step even farther back and say, well, if mold stirred this up, I've got to treat the mold if I want the MCAS to be managed. Sleep. Dr. Bransfield, who I'm a big fan of, he's a psychiatrist. He talked about sleep deprivation, which is so super mega tremendous. Non-restorative sleep can cause fatigue, cognitive and emotional impairment, immune dysfunction, disease progression, etc. So when you sleep, you have these 90 to 120 minute sleep cycles. Something that I learned from Dr. Bransfield at the conference. The first two sleep cycles, so the first two 90 to 120 minute cycles, are physically restorative, and then the consequent sleep cycles are emotionally restorative. That's pretty interesting. So 90 to 120 minute cycles, that means you've got to be sleeping a minimum 3 to 4 hours for your body to heal itself, but then it's after that that the emotional restoration comes in. And you have a couple of different ways to address it, but I think what's important is that you do address it. I remember someone saying once, well, I don't want to take anything for my sleep problems because I don't want to disrupt my natural sleep cycle. Your natural sleep cycle is already disrupted, and it's going to screw with you. So you need to treat your sleep. There are a lot of things you can do natural and as far as supplements, but I have no problem with sleep medication, the right ones, because not sleeping's not natural, and you're going to be in real bad shape. And when someone finally talked me into taking medicine for sleep 23 or 24 years ago, it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. Fewer headaches, fewer stomach problems, less diarrhea, less anxiety. I mean, it's just absolute gold. So that's part of healing the terrain. Is it true that if you heal from the infections, your sleep might fix itself? Sure. But I also think you're more likely to heal from infection if you are sleeping, because our immune systems are super active at night. Restoring missing micronutrients. I'm not going to dive too far into that because we've talked about that a lot on this podcast, but that's why we are including the micronutrient testing as part of our foundations package, because guessing is expensive too. And me saying, well, you're tired, try this B vitamin. Well, your white blood cells are low, try X nutrient. I want to know what your body's missing and get you to optimal nutrient levels so that your cells can repair themselves and function. The last thing I'll touch on in this episode is mindset for healing. So one of the speakers, this wasn't in a continuing education presentation, but just a bonus speaker, I guess. Janice Niederhofer, who founded what's called the Humankind Alliance. And she is actually a patient of Dr. Robert Mosiani's. And he told us he has never met a patient like her. She has a really fascinating story. She was the first female SWAT agent for the DEA. I think I'm saying that right, but it was a pretty big deal. She was pretty bad. She was killing it in her career. She got a flea bite. She got Bartonella. It was a long time before she realized that's what she had. She became disabled. She had a lot of neurological issues, cognitive issues, no longer able to work. Actually, God bless her, she got up on the stage and she tripped. And she said, that wouldn't have happened before Bartonella. And before Bartonella, I would have just been able to give this speech without notes and with a half-hour presentation. And it took me a long time to put it together. And I'm using notes and I'm having technical problems, so I'm having to read them. But she was remarkable because even though her life has been completely derailed by this illness, she's so grateful for the progress that she's made. And she says she's not bitter at all. She feels like her experience brought her to where she is now, where she's doing something different. It was also a really nice thing as a provider. She said some things that I needed to hear. It's, sometimes, like all of you, I carry heavy burdens between my work, my family, our health, and it gets really, really overwhelming. But she was very encouraging. She said to the providers, you're the difference between someone fading away and someone finding their life and light again. And a turning point for her was when she saw the way others had responded and were suffering and just decided, that's not going to be me. And I wrote down a quote. She said she realized that the heaviest thing I was carrying was the weight of pretending I was okay. And so being honest about what's going on is really, really important. She said that knowledge plus courage equals power. So you have to have knowledge and you have to have the courage to act. Dr. Mosiani told her, I guess at one point in her treatment, you're so compliant. And she said, well, isn't everyone? I trust you. I want you to get better. And it does take a big investment of faith to follow through with treatment plans. I know that there's a lot of adjustment, that everybody responds differently, but I do see a trend where not everybody's willing to give things time to see if it works. I had someone with some major neurological issues come in just the other day, and basically he's going to give what we're doing 2 months, and if not, he's got someone else he's going to try. And I'm pretty sure he's going to be going to someone else because it takes time. I mean, it just takes time to heal, especially if you've been sick for a very, very long time. She encouraged everyone to take the path of integrity, not the path of popularity, and has these 3 C's. Commitment plus compliance equals a compelling future. And it keeps you searching even when things look really, really dark. And she said that her experience happened for her, not to her, which was pretty inspiring to me. And she encouraged people to look for the reason because it gives purpose to your pain. If you don't have a compelling future that you've envisioned, you can't heal and you don't have a reason to fight. She told us as providers to invite our patients to assemble a team that's outside of our office because you need to protect the healers, to guard their energy, their hearts, and our purpose. And I appreciated that. It's an interesting balance because we love providing support to our patients. We love it that we can give you encouragement and understanding that other places can't. But we are a limited resource with our time and our emotions, and we're trying to take care of a lot of people. So I would never want to discourage anyone from reaching out when they need to, but I would encourage them to look at other resources that they can incorporate in their life so they have another support team. And things that she recommended including on your team were things like good friends who understand, a purpose, prayer, all of those resources that are looking at your social, spiritual, emotional tank. I was thinking this morning that of the phrase, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It's 2025. Most of us aren't walking 1,000 miles. So I would say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a full gas tank, good food, and a functioning vehicle. And so you've got to fill your tank. That's what this healing terrain is. You've got to have a travel plan. You've got to nourish yourself. You've got to make sure everything's in working order so that this healing journey is successful and you're not stalling out in the middle of Kansas, right? You want to be able to make it all the way. There may be a lot of pit stops. My other new analogy, because it's football season, is that healing is kind of like a football game, because I was watching games Saturday night and my team won. So that's really, really good. But if you think of a football game, there is a lot of drama, and you have some successful drives and some unsuccessful drives. And sometimes you're like getting there and then you get this massive penalty and you're basically starting over. You get to the end zone, you think this is it, we're going to score. And then there's a turnover, heaven knows what else. But you have to just keep building. You have to keep looking forward to the next play. And that's the way to do it. You don't think about, other than assessing what you need to fix, all the things that went wrong. It's like, okay, it's a new drive. It's a new set of downs. We just keep going. And it doesn't matter what happened before. It's the outcome, which is a result of what you put in. And you can get so tripped up on your mistakes that you psych yourself out and you don't win. And sometimes you'll win in regulation. Sometimes it's in double overtime. Sometimes you'll have seasons where you have a lot of wins and a few losses. Sometimes it goes the other way. But if you look at a successful football program, which is what I term my 2025 BYU Cougar football team to be, and hopefully that will still be true when this is released because it's going to be in a few weeks. We've had bumps along the way. We've had good seasons. We've had bad seasons, but we're always rebuilding. And Coach Satake is so super freaking positive, like just enjoy this moment. Don't worry about what happened before. Let's look to the next play. We win a game and he's like, all right, everyone tonight, I want you to go have fun, enjoy this moment. And then Monday we're back to work and we worry about next week. It's just like kind of a phenomenal mentality. And you see someone who has enabled these athletes to find joy in the process. So whether it's a sports analogy, a travel analogy, think of something that resonates with you and wrap your mind around the idea that there's a process, that there's going to be bumps, there's going to be ups and downs, but one quote unquote failure isn't a failure and it doesn't mean it's over. It's something to learn from. You learned what doesn't work. You learned what is important and you can't leave behind. I promise if you stick to it, you will get there. Remember to have hope because you were made to be whole. Have a podcast question or suggestion? Text or call us on the podcast info line at 330-439-0686. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to be notified when new episodes release. And remember, you were made to be whole.